So hello everyone, thank you for your time and watching this presentation. In the next 20 minutes, I would like to invite you to my research and tell you a story about the technology innovation, a creative industry and the future work. This presentation will be divided into three parts. First, I will give a context of my research and how it led me to my research question and objectives. Last, I will take a case study analysis to fulfill my research objectives. So my research interest was intrigued by a hot debate on the topic about this new wave of technology innovation, namely artificial intelligence, and its impact on the employment market. And scholars are divided into the two camps. On the one side, scholars argued that the introduction of new technology and its impact on employment market is not something new, and historically, new technology has led to the job creation rather than loss, and they gave us three reasons to support this argument. They point out that first, not every job is substitutable, and secondly, the technology can stimulate productivity and economic growth, which leads to the job growth, and third, and this new technology sector will create jobs in themselves. Also, the general assumptions here is that they believe that the task rather than the whole job were likely to be automated, and therefore human capacity in many jobs would be augmented rather than replaced. This combined with increased productivity will lead to the growth of wages, resulting in increasing in aggregate demand, and then more consumption will create more jobs opportunity in the wider economy. Therefore, they believe that the overall effect will be a net positive on the labor market. However, on the other side, scholars claim that this time will be different. More jobs might be eliminated rather than created. They suggest that the current technology revolution is a step change from these historical events. This is because there are parts of this technology that have equivalence or even advancement on the human intellectual competency, and meaning not only manual tasks can be replaced, but intellectual jobs can be cutted. Secondly, if this technology are combined with a falling cost, more jobs will become viable to be replaced by automation. Jobs that are once seemed safe from automation because they involved complex tasks such as cooking and driving are now even being performed without human assistance. Last, they point out that there is no clear evidence where the new job will be created. Indeed, this wheel of the future labor, where the widespread job losses will occur, is becoming the dominant explanation of the effect of implementing the new technology innovations. So, in order to avoid the mass unemployment caused by this wave of new technology innovation, the policymakers and the policy initiatives focused on the skill set that arguably cannot easily be replaced by the AI, and one of the skill sets is human creativity. Scholars argue that the ability to deal with the complex knowledge and act creatively is important and difficult to replace. In other words, solving complex tasks that require the creative integration of new information seems relatively immune to the AI technology shift. And this could mean an increased role for the arts and humanity, and which develops creative, contextual, and analytical skills, and which will likely becoming more important in the world and shaped by the AI. Therefore, the government policy has focused on growing the creative industries and providing opportunities for the creative work. Also, it was to point out that this is also based on the evidence that this sector is continue to outperform than other sectors in terms of the job creating, and having already growing 300,000 jobs between the 2011 and 2015. However, while the policy and outlook is optimal, we need to examine whether the new job created in the creative sector will be able to cover the job lost in practice. So how many jobs will be replaced? There are two approaches used to assess job loss, namely the occupation-oriented or the task-oriented methodology. and their result varied from the 90–70%, but reached with a consensus result at around 30% of the current job will be replaced through AI and technology automation in the UK. But how many jobs will be created? In terms of the job creation, research conducted by the McKinsey shows some sectors like healthcare and technology will create new jobs that did not exist before and would see a growth in 8 or 9% in 2030. And in the UK creative industry, are on a track to create 900,000 new jobs by 2030. Well, that is very impressive number, but clearly this is not enough to cover the 30% of the job currently lost in the wild economy. Also, it is worth to point out that whether the people lost jobs in other sectors are transferable into the creative industry is also questionable. So, since the government and the policymakers in the UK are focused on growing the creative industries, this demands, according to the new classic economic theory, that we can boost both the demand and supply side of this market. So from the demand side, and we need to consider those factors that determine the consumption of the creative products, that's including the size of the population, a consumer available free time, and their disposable income. And one scenario could be that the labor productivity increased, and following the automation, and earnings will rise with a less time spent at work, and more disposable wages and spare time could lead to an increase in the demanding for the creative product. However, even under this scenario, the total amount of the time is fixed per day, as is 24 hours per household, and with more creative product launched, the selectivity of the product will likely to increase, and hence it will increase the supply side competition. On the supply side, unfortunately, it seems this labor market in the sector is already in a position that is saturated and oversupplied. According to the survey, the company in this industry is heavily relied on the volunteers, a flexible but exploited labor groups, to sustain their operations. Therefore, in order to solve the potential dilemma that caused between the policy and practice, it leads me to my research questions. That what scope is there for the growth of employment opportunities within the creative industry in the United Kingdom? In order to achieve this, the paper will explore the trends and forecasts in the sector before taking the UK film industry as an example of the potential opportunities and threats to the future employment. I think the film industry will provide an interesting case study for considering the effect of AI and automation on this creative sector. And there are several reasons. And first of all, filmmaking is a group creativity that involved people from both creative and non-creative personnel, and they varied from different professional domains. And secondly, the industry experience a high level of risk and relative to the creative work conduct. And since identifying which creative initiatives are viable is difficult, it results in a significant high failure rate for creative product. And last, under the current system, only a tiny number of those who do creative work are rewarded effectively by the system. And due to the low barriers to entry, it seems there is already an oversupply of labor, and they suffering from the long working hours and low job payment. In this case study, by examining the three divisions, production, distribution, exhibition, and the market, I found out what are these factors that might prevent the further growth of the creative industry. So I shall start with production division to find out what are these barriers. The motion picture production is the business of biting on the creative talents, and therefore they developed logic and conventions for recognition through having to identify, develop, and organize creativity and creative people. However, to what extent is this system be efficient in achieving this. Arguably, I think its inefficiency is already manifested by a paradox that on the one side, they are looking for the promise on the stars and lead to a high skill distribution to the income and opportunities in the employment market. But also, there is showing the high failure rates are caused by the stars and who obtain the majority resources and opportunities in this industry. This phenomenon that the resources and the opportunities tend to concentrate in the hands of the top-tier stars is very common across the film industries, regardless of its geographic location or cultural context. And I think there are several reasons and caused this situation. These are the conventions and the nature of this industry. Namely, they are the A-B list, group creativity, and the division between the creative and non-creative workers. So, arguably, the nature of betting on the creative talents and make it depend on the people who already made successful records. By doing this, and it allows the industry to achieve the control over the risk of hiring the A-list talents and with regard to their productivity, efficiency, and cost. The power of A-list people and increases over the long term owing to their accumulated advantages. However, it begs the question that to what extent are this between the difference between the A-B list talents is due to the gap in their creative abilities. Caves have argued that the income of top talents increased disproportionately due to the creative advantage they accumulated, and argue that the gap between their income and for the people in this industry is unlikely to be caused by the difference in the creative ability, but by the inefficiency of selecting and the pricing system. So, what makes this pricing system is not efficient? One of the reasons that is due to the fact the filmmaking is a process of group creativity, and this can complicate the value system. The group creativity brings a problem in that it is hard to assess how we fairly attribute the past success or failure of one film to a single creative individual, whether it's director, actor, or scriptwriter, and to provide a precise measurement of their value, so it can be used as a reference for later. The filmmaking is a dynamic process and of identifying and developing creativity with their co-workers from the pre-production to the post-production. And therefore, the nature of this complicated relationship within the ongoing creative process makes it difficult to distinguish the contribution of each single individual, and with a precise measurement of their creative value. Hence, the effectiveness of ranking creative input and making selection based on the past achievement is highly contestable. Therefore, the A-B list pricing system may not be as efficient as it's supposed to be. Sadly, the current division between the creative and non-creative people in the film industry may also limit the capacity of for the further growth. Traditionally, people in the film industry were distinguished through being referred as above the line, the creatives, and below the line, the non-creative groups. And it's argued that each type of worker will be practicing under the different cultures and production modes depending on their grouping in these categories. However, this division might be oversimplified. For instance, we're using the director and editor as an example. Even today, there are few directors who hold enough power to make the final edit of their shootings. On the contrary, the role of the below-the-line editor must include a creative aspect, as they can exercise power in finalizing a director's output. The end result is that the current categorization and which distinguishes the creative and non-creative worker in the film industry is both ambiguous and problematic. And therefore, a recognition system that is ignorant and lacking knowledge in those roles can prevent the system from identifying and developing creative effectively and limit the capacity of the industry. So, what is the capacity of the film industry? Every year, out of thousands of scripts, only 100 of that will be developed into the films, and only top 10 of these films will generate almost 60% of the financial return from the market. And through the analysis, I would argue that this is either the explanation that the market may not be able to absorb the more growth in creative product, or the industry is indeed inefficient in identifying and delivering the creative content and lead to a poorly served audience and reduces opportunity for growth. Here, I'll focus on the second option and to argue that the inefficiency is caused by the distribution and exhibition division. Due to the ability to in the investment and requirement relative to the marketing and exhibition, a distribution is in a position to control and act as a narrow funnel between the production and exhibition, and they are in control of the creative project and, more importantly, the financial resources. And exhibitors prefer to deal with the distributors as who have the track record rather than working with independent production companies. The decisions made in the distribution are constrained by the exhibitor who's seeking the box office results. Distribution company will therefore choose those creative projects that can make potential sales. To a certain extent, working this way is efficient to allocate resources to the right creative people. However, functioning in this way might lead to the incentive for the production system to identify and develop creativity, and is subsequently becoming less effective at doing so. Instead of constantly searching for the new forms of creativity, Bierstedt, anthropologist in the film industry, argued that the film industry attempts to substitute the formula for the storyteller's imagination and skills. In the end, I would argue this inefficiency is caused by the fundamental contradiction set in the nature of these organizations. On the one hand, the industry is trying to deliver the creative ideas of creative workers. However, it is also driven by the principle of the profit maximization. Film industry is a high-risk business, and the way it organizes and allocated resources is unique. The initial sunk costs involved in the production of a film are very high, and this continues with irreversible investment until the end of the post-production. Moreover, most of the time, the film production does not have any collateral to use in order to raise funds, and no one can make a proper valuation of the potential returns created during the production. But after passing the film to the distribution, the cost of making an extra copy is marginal. This feature forces the company in the industry to pursue creativity and differentiate their product, and all its profitability is determined by the scope of its audience and how much they can charge on them. To a certain extent, this organizational system facilitates the efficiency in allocating the resources to those viable creative people and projects, but there are incentives for them to be less effective in the process of identifying and developing creativity. Because by designing the genre, star genre, launching blockbuster series, they can substitute creativity with formulaic tactics, which allow them to pursue the profit maximization and control risks involved in being creative. In a short conclusion, in the paper, we have explored the potential impact of AI on the employment market and asked whether the current creative industry policy response are a viable option for dealing with the structural changes on the labor market. This policy will reveal in terms of whether continue to support the growth of creative industry and cultivating individual creativity can lead to the type of job growth necessary to mitigate the impact of this new technology on the labor market. We argue that in order for the creative industry to grow as policy initiatives might hope, the issues within the demand and supply side of the creative industry product will need to be tackled. And through the examination of recognition system within the film industry, we identify that currently there are significant barriers to growth in the labor market that might hinder the currently policy initiatives. These barriers require urgent research, especially into the system of creativity recognition within the film industry. Creativity is vital to the growth of creative industry. This research demonstrates that there is much to be learned about how best to facilitate the identification, development, and potential for growing labor market that human creativity can have.